They laughed when he called me trash, a remark light enough to pass for banter but sharp enough to slice the room. They had no idea I was the silent hand behind the two deals keeping their legacy alive. They certainly did not know the Wexler empire was sitting on a debt bomb I controlled. The irony was that he had written the button himself in the very terms he forced me to sign. My name is Emma Ramirez, and I was currently sitting at a mahogany table that likely cost more than the entire house I grew up in back in Ohio. The air in the dining room of the Lake Forest estate was so thin and cold, it felt like we were eating inside a cryogenics lab rather than a home. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead like frozen tears, casting a sharp, unforgiving light on the 12 people seated below. This was not a family dinner, it was a tribunal. I adjusted the napkin on my lap, smoothing out the invisible creases. I had been dating Reed Wexler for 2 years. I knew he came from money. I knew his last name carried the weight of steel mills, energy grids, and political lobbying in Illinois. But I had never seen the machinery of the Wexler dynasty up close until tonight. Reed had insisted it was time. He wanted me to meet his father, Barton Wexler, the patriarch of Wexler Dominion. He had squeezed my hand in the car, promising me that his father was just old-fashioned and that I just needed to be myself. Reed was wrong. Being myself was exactly the problem. To the people in this room, I was Emma Ramirez, a 37-year-old woman with brown skin, a public university education, and a modest job in tech consulting. That was the cover I maintained. It was a comfortable shield. It allowed me to navigate the world without the sharks smelling blood. They did not know I was the founder of Halcyon Forge. They did not know that my modest job was actually a smokescreen for owning the most advanced clean energy patents in the Northern Hemisphere. They did not know that the very company Barton Wexler was desperate to partner with was owned by the woman he was currently ignoring. The guests were a curated collection of Barton's ecosystem. There was a state senator whose smile didn't reach his eyes, a hedge fund manager who looked at me like I was a rounding error, and a pair of gala donors who spent 20 minutes discussing the tax benefits of buying art they didn't like. And then there was Barton Wexler. He sat at the head of the table, a man carved out of granite and expensive scotch. He had not looked me in the eye since I arrived. He spoke over me. He spoke around me. He asked Reed questions about his portfolio, ignoring the fact that Reed was trying to include me in the conversation. It was a power play, archaic and petty, but effective. The first course was cleared by a fleet of silent staff. I watched Reed. He looked pale. He was 37 years old, a grown man with his own career, yet in this house, he shrank. His shoulders hunched forward, his voice dropped an octave. I realized then that the Wexler legacy wasn't power, it was fear. It was a terror that wore a three-piece suit. Barton finally turned his gaze toward me. It felt physical, like a splash of ice water. "So, Emma," he said, dragging out the syllables of my name as if tasting something spoiled. "Reed tells me you are from Ohio." "Yes, sir," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "A small town outside of Dayton." "Dayton," he repeated, looking around the table to invite the others to share in the joke. "Industrial decline, Rust Belt. I suppose that explains the ambition. People from desperate places are always so hungry to climb." I felt Reed stiffen beside me. I took a sip of water. "It is not about climbing. Mr. Wexler, it is about building," Barton scoffed. A dry hacking sound. "Building. Everyone wants to build until they realize they lack the foundation. Foundations are inherited, Emma. They are not poured by people who come from nothing." The table went quiet. The senator looked down at his soup. The hedge fund manager smirked. This was the show they had come for, the humiliation of the outsider. Reed cleared his throat. "Dad, Emma has had a very successful career. She is incredibly smart." Barton slammed his hand on the table. The silver rattled. "Smart does not equal suitable," Reed Barton barked, his face flushing a deep, dangerous red. "Do not interrupt me when I am assessing the damage." I placed my spoon down. "Assessment. Is that what this is?" Barton leaned forward. His eyes were hard, devoid of any human warmth. Let us be honest. Ms. Ramirez, you are here because my son has a soft heart and a weak head. He thinks love conquers history. But I look at you and I see a liability. I see someone looking for a payout. I see a genetic dead end for a family that has stood at the peak of American industry for 80 years. Dad, stop, Reed whispered. It was a plea, not a command. Barton ignored him. He picked up his wine glass, swirling the dark red liquid. This house does not accept trash drifting onto the dinner table. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I could hear the breathing of the woman across from me. Trash. He had said it with the casual ease of ordering coffee. Reed looked at me, his eyes wide with panic. He was waiting for me to cry. He was waiting for me to run so he could chase me and play the hero. Or perhaps he was waiting for me to apologize for existing. Barton wasn't finished. He took a sip of wine and set the glass down with a sharp clink. Do not stain this lineage with a charity case. Reed, it is embarrassing. I looked at Reed. I waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. He did not speak. He did not slam his fist on the table. He did not tell his father to go to hell. He just sat there, paralyzed by a lifetime of conditioning. He was a good man in a vacuum, but in this atmosphere, he suffocated. That was the moment the relationship ended. It didn't end with a scream or a fight. It ended with the realization that Reed would never own himself. He was leased property, and Barton held the deed. I pushed my chair back. The sound of wood scraping against the parquet floor was loud, violent, and deliberate. Every head snapped toward me. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I did not shake. My heart was hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I looked at Barton Wexler. I looked him dead in the eyes, and for the first time all night, he looked unsettled. He expected tears. He expected shouting. He did not expect ice. I picked up my clutch from the table. Thank you. Barton, I said. My voice was low, clear, and carried to every corner of the room. He blinked, confused. Thank you. Yes, I continued. Thank you for showing me your true colors before I made the mistake of confusing your behavior with class. The senator choked on his water. Barton's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. Get out, Barton hissed. I am already going, I said, turning away from the table. I walked toward the archway. I did not hurry. I moved with the pacing of someone who had simply lost interest in a boring movie. I walked past the security team standing by the doors. I walked past the house staff, who had their heads bowed in secondhand shame. I did not run. I was not fleeing a battlefield. I was withdrawing from a cheap stage that was beneath my dignity. Emma Reed's voice cracked behind me. I kept walking. I pushed open the heavy oak front doors and stepped out into the cool Illinois night. The air tasted sweet, free of the stale scent of old money and decay. The gravel of the driveway crunched under my heels. Emma, wait. I reached my car, a practical, 4-year-old sedan that fit my cover perfectly. I had my hand on the door handle when Reed caught up to me. He was out of breath, his face pale in the moonlight. He grabbed my arm, then immediately let go as if he had been burned. I am so sorry. He gasped. He is drunk. He doesn't mean it. I looked at him, the man I had thought I might marry. He looked like a child wearing his father's clothes. He means every word. Reed, I said, and deep down, you know that. You just hoped I would be strong enough to take the beating so you wouldn't have to. No, that is not it, Reed pleaded, his hands shaking. I was just shocked. I froze. I will fix this. I will talk to him. I will make him apologize. I shook my head slowly. You cannot fix something that is rotten from the system up. This isn't a misunderstanding. It is a world view, and you are too afraid of him to ever challenge it. I love you. Emma, he said, tears forming in his eyes. I know, I said softly, but you fear him more. I opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat. The fabric felt grounding. This was my space, my car, my life. Reed stood there, a silhouette against the sprawling, lit-up mansion that looked more like a mausoleum than a home. He looked small. I started the engine and reversed out of the spot. I did not look back at him. I drove down the long, winding driveway, past the manicured hedges and the iron gates that cost more than most people earned in a decade. As soon as I cleared the gates and hit the public road, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a sharp, demanding vibration. I glanced at the screen. It was Mara Venn, my chief legal officer and right-hand woman at Halcyon Forge. It was 8 in the evening on a Saturday. Mara only called if the building was on fire or if money was moving. I answered on the speakerphone. "This is Emma." "Emma, I know you are at the dinner, but you need to hear this." Mara's voice was crisp, professional, and laced with urgency. "I am not at the dinner anymore," I said, merging onto the highway. "What is happening?" "We just got a communication from Wexler Dominion's legal team," Mara said. "They are pushing. They want to move the signing ceremony up. They are demanding we close the deal by Monday morning at 9 o'clock. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. It was not a smile of happiness. It was the smile of a hunter who just realized the prey had walked into the trap. "Why the rush?" I asked. Though I already suspected the answer. "They are claiming it is scheduling conflicts," Mara said. "But my contact in their finance department says otherwise. They are bleeding. Emma, if they do not announce this partnership with Halcyon Forge by the opening bell on Monday, their credit rating takes a hit. They are desperate." I looked in the rearview mirror. The lights of the Wexler estate were just a faint glow in the distance. Barton Wexler had just called me trash. He had just thrown me out of his house because he thought I was a nobody from Ohio looking for a handout. He had no idea that the trash he just discarded was the only thing standing between his company and total collapse. "Tell them we received the request," I said, my voice calm, stripping away the emotion of the last hour. "Do we agree to the time change?" Mara asked. I gripped the steering wheel. The sadness was gone. The humiliation was gone. In their place was something cold and hard, like a diamond. "No," I said, "don't answer them yet. Let them sweat for the rest of the weekend." "But Emma, the deal?" "There is no deal." "Mara," I interrupted, "not anymore." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Barton Wexler just made a very expensive mistake." I said, "Prepare the files. I want to see everything we have on their debt structure." "I am coming to the office. Tonight, I confirmed. I hung up the phone. The road ahead was dark, but for the first time all night, I could see everything clearly. They wanted a war. They wanted to remind me of my place. Fine, I would show them my place. It was at the head of the table, signing their eviction notice. The halogen lights of the Halcyon Forge headquarters hummed with a silence that I found infinitely more comforting than the crystal-clinking tension of the Wexler dining room. I swiped my keycard, the heavy glass doors sliding open to reveal the sanctuary I had built from the ground up, to the world, and specifically to the Wexler family. I was a mid-level consultant with a lucky streak. That was a carefully constructed fiction. The reality was buried under layers of legal insulation that would make a forensic accountant sweat. Halcyon Forge was not just a startup. It was the industry leader in grid-scale energy storage, and I was not just its founder. I was the ghost in the machine. Through a complex network of blind trusts, holding companies registered in Delaware, and proxy voting structures, I retained absolute controlling interest while my name appeared nowhere on public filings as the primary owner. I liked it that way, in my world. Anonymity was armor. It allowed me to walk into rooms, listen to what people really thought of me, and leave with their leverage in my pocket before they even knew they had been robbed. I walked past the rows of empty workstations, the blue glow of server status lights reflecting off the polished concrete floor. My heels clicked with a rhythmic authority that felt like a heartbeat returning to normal. I entered my office, a glass box overlooking the Chicago skyline, and threw my clutch onto the couch. Mara Venn was already there. She was standing by the smart wall, her arms crossed, looking at a waterfall of data streams. Mara was 40, sharp as a scalpel, and the only person who knew exactly how much power I actually held. She did not ask about the dinner. She did not ask about Reed. She knew me better than that. She pointed a stylus at the screen. The Wexler legal team has sent 3 more emails in the last hour. Mara said, her voice flat. They are bypassing the usual protocol. They want the signature page for the letter of intent executed by 8 o'clock Monday morning. They are citing logistical reasons, claiming Barton wants to announce it before the Asian markets open on Tuesday. I walked behind my desk and woke up my terminal. They are lying, I said. Mara nodded. Obviously. You do not push a $200 million partnership forward by 48 hours unless you are running from something. I logged into the secure data room. This was the digital vault where Wexler Dominion had deposited their financials as part of the due diligence process for our partnership. For the past 3 months, I had looked at these numbers with the eyes of a partner. I had looked for synergies. I had looked for ways my technology could modernize their aging coal and gas infrastructure. I had been looking for a marriage. Now, I was looking for a funeral. Pull up their debt maturity schedule, I commanded, and overlay it with their current liquidity ratios. Mara tapped the screen. The graph shifted. 2 lines appeared. One red, one green. The red line was rising sharply, intersecting the green line which was plummeting. Here is the problem, Mara said, tracing the intersection point. Wexler Dominion has a balloon payment due on a syndicate loan in 6 weeks. It is $350 million. I leaned forward, studying the numbers. $350 million. That was a significant number, even for a giant like Wexler. But for a giant that had posted losses for 6 consecutive quarters while trying to pivot to green energy without the technology to back it up. It was a death sentence. They do not have the cash. I said, no, Mara replied, and their credit rating is teetering on junk status. If they get downgraded, the interest rate on that loan triples. They will trigger a default. I sat back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. The picture was becoming clear. Barton Wexler had sat at that dinner table, surrounded by his sycophants, and lectured me about heritage. He had called me trash. He had sneered at my background. All the while, he was sitting on a throne that was being eaten by termites. He needed Halcyon Forge. He did not just want our tech to look good for the shareholders. He needed our balance sheet to guarantee his debt refinancing. Without this deal, I said, my voice quiet, the banks will not extend the loan. Exactly, Mara said. The Halcyon partnership is the collateral. They are trading on your reputation. Emma, they are using our stability to convince the bank that they are still a viable business. I felt a cold laugh bubble up in my chest. It was absurd. The man who told me I wasn't good enough to eat at his table was secretly praying that my company would save his legacy. He was trying to marry his son to me not out of love, but as a corporate strategy. Or perhaps Reed was just a useful idiot, a way to keep me close. While Barton secured the asset, dig deeper. I said, I want to see the covenants. Look for the break clauses. We spent the next 2 hours dissecting the corpse of the Wexler empire. We found it in a buried folder of internal compliance documents. It was an email chain between the Wexler chief financial officer and the head of their audit committee. The subject line was benign, Q3 risk assessment. I opened the attachment. The text was stark. If the Halcyon deal is not finalized and announced before the quarter closes, we will breach the EBITDA covenant on the primary bond issuance. The banks will have the right to accelerate the debt. We will not survive the next quarter. I stared at the words. We will not survive. It was a confession. It was the smoking gun. I thought back to the dinner. I replayed Barton's voice in my head. Don't make a mess of the lineage. We don't accept trash. I realized then that his cruelty was not just arrogance. It was panic. He was a terrified animal backed into a corner, baring his teeth to look dangerous. He spoke of honor and tradition because those were the only assets he had left that weren't leveraged to the hilt. He needed to make me feel small so that I wouldn't notice he was standing on quicksand. He needed to dominate me because if he didn't, I might look up and see that I was the one holding the leash. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights of Chicago stretched out before me, a grid of power and ambition, somewhere out there, in the dark suburbs of Lake Forest. Barton Wexler was probably pouring himself another scotch, congratulating himself on putting the upstart girl in her place. He probably thought he had won. He probably thought that by Monday morning, I would sign the papers just to prove I was worthy of his acceptance. He thought this was a social game. He thought I was crying over a broken engagement. I checked my reflection in the glass. My eyes were dry. My pulse was slow. I felt a clarity that was almost intoxicating. I was not sad. I was not heartbroken. I was insulted. Yes, but the insult had mutated into something useful. It had become a weapon. "This is not a personal grievance anymore," I said to the window. Mara looked up from her tablet. "What is it then?" "It is a legal lever," I said, turning back to face her. I walked over to the whiteboard where we had mapped out the integration plan for the merger. I picked up an eraser. With one swift motion, I wiped away the timeline for the signing ceremony. "Stop the deal," I said. Mara paused. She did not look surprised, but she was cautious. "You know the breakup fee is substantial. If we walk away now without cause, we owe them $2 million. I shrugged. $2 million is a cheap price to pay for the look on his face. But we are not walking away without cause. We are pausing due to new information regarding the stability of the leadership. I tapped the screen where the CFO's email was displayed. "Draft a formal notice," I instructed. "We are suspending negotiations effective immediately. Cite a conflict of values and concerns regarding the long-term solvency of the partner entity. Use the exact legal phrasing that allows us to exit the letter of intent based on material adverse change." Mara began typing furiously. "You know this will kill them. Emma, if we pull out publicly, their stock will tank on Monday morning. The rumors alone will cause a run on their bonds." "I know," I said. I walked back to my desk and sat down. I thought about Reed. I thought about his apology in the driveway. I will fix this. He couldn't fix this. He was part of the collateral damage. He was a man who had been bred to inherit a kingdom that was already burning. I felt a pang of pity for him, but it was distant, like watching a character in a movie make a bad choice. Barton Wexler wanted to play the role of the gatekeeper. He wanted to decide who got a seat at the table. He didn't realize that the table belonged to whoever could pay the bill. "Emma," Mara said, looking up, "are you sure? Once I send this, there is no going back. This is a declaration of war." I looked at the digital clock on my desk. It was almost midnight. The day had started with me picking out a dress to impress my future father-in-law. It was ending with me preparing to dismantle his life's work. "I am not running away." "Mara," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Barton made it very clear that I do not belong at his table as a guest. He was right. I don't want to sit there and be grateful for the scraps he throws me." I picked up a pen and twirled it between my fingers. "Send the notice," I said. "I do not want to be the person asking for a seat anymore. I want to be the person who owns the furniture." Mara hit enter. The sound of the keystroke was soft, but in the quiet office, it sounded like a gavel coming down. The email was gone. It was flying through the servers, making its way to the inbox of Barton Wexler and his entire legal team. They would wake up on Sunday morning expecting a submission. Instead, they were going to get an eviction notice. "Now," I said, standing up again, "let's talk about their debt." Mara brought up the list of creditors. Most of the debt is held by a consortium of banks, but there is a secondary tranche of high-yield bonds trading on the open market. They are currently trading at 80 cents on the dollar, if the deal falls through. I said, "Where do those bonds go?" "They will drop to junk," Mara said. "Probably 40 cents, maybe 30. "Good," I said. "I want you to prepare a list of every institution holding that paper. We are not just going to watch them fail. We are going to buy the wreckage." Mara smiled, a sharp, predatory expression that mirrored my own. "You are going to buy their debt. I am going to buy their future," I corrected. "Barton thinks he can dictate terms to me because he has the name, but names do not pay the bills. Cash does. And by the time I am done, I will own the very ground he stands on. I looked at the CFO's email one last time before closing the window. We will not survive. No, Barton. I thought, you won't, but I will. I turned off the lights in my office. The blue glow of the server room guided me out. I walked out into the cool night air of Chicago, feeling lighter than I had in years. The engagement was over. The charade was over. The nice girl from Ohio who just wanted to fit in was gone. In her place was the CEO of Halcyon Forge, and she was going shopping. Monday morning arrived with the sterile precision of a scalpel. The sun was barely up over Lake Michigan, casting a gray, steely light through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, but the war room at Halcyon Forge had been active since 4 o'clock. The coffee machine was humming, and the air was thick with the static electricity of a pending execution. I stood by the smart wall, watching the live feed of the financial news. The ticker at the bottom of the screen was already scrolling headlines about the energy sector. There were rumors. Wexler Dominion had done a good job priming the pump. Their PR team had been leaking whispers of a transformative partnership all weekend. They were inflating the balloon, desperate to get the stock price up before the market opened. They had no idea I was holding a needle. Mara Venn walked in, holding a tablet like a shield. Her face was pale but set with grim determination. She knew exactly what we were about to do. We were not just breaking a deal. We were detonating a bomb in the middle of Chicago's financial district. Is it drafted? I asked, not turning away from the window. Yes, Mara said. The formal withdrawal of the letter of intent, the cancellation of the bridge financing, and the notification to the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding the termination of negotiations. Read me the cause clause, I commanded. Mara swiped her screen. Pursuant to Section 4, Paragraph B of the preliminary agreement, Halcyon Forge is exercising its right to withdraw immediately. We are citing a fundamental conflict of corporate values and, specifically, the identification of material risk regarding toxic executive leadership. I turned around. Toxic executive leadership. The words hung in the air. In the polite, coded world of high finance, you usually blamed market conditions or regulatory hurdles when a deal fell apart. You did not attack the CEO personally. You did not put it in writing that the man at the top was poison. Send it, I said. Mara hesitated for a fraction of a second. She tapped the screen. Are you sure about the phrasing? She asked. Once this hits the legal discovery phase, Barton will sue for defamation. He will say we tanked his stock on purpose. Let him sue, I said, walking over to my desk. Truth is an absolute defense against libel. And we have the emails. We have the internal reports of him falsifying safety checks to save money. We have the proof that his leadership is a liability. Send it to Barton's personal email, his general counsel, and the entire board of directors. Copy their external auditors, just to be sure it cannot be buried. Mara took a deep breath. She looked at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of fear. She was used to aggressive business, but this was personal warfare. It is done, she said, tapping the final command. I checked my watch. It was 7:55. The markets opened in 35 minutes. Barton Wexler was likely sitting in his office right now, adjusting his silk tie, waiting for the document that would save his empire. He was probably rehearsing his speech about how he had graciously allowed a small innovator to join the Wexler family. 3 minutes later, the first phone rang. It was the red line, the direct secure link to the legal department. Mara ignored it. Then my cell phone lit up. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was Lake Forest. I silenced it. 10 seconds later, the office line buzzed. They are calling, Mara said, watching the lines light up like a Christmas tree. Let it ring, I said. We have work to do. What is the status on Redwood? Mara looked up. Surprised I was already moving to the next move. Redwood Utilities Group was Wexler Dominion's arch-rival. They were the second largest player in the Midwest. A company Barton hated with a biblical passion. They were aggressive, modern, and had been trying to eat into Wexler's market share for a decade. I have their CEO's executive assistant on hold. Mara said, they were surprised to hear from us. They thought we were locked in with Wexler. Put them through. I said. I picked up the receiver. My voice shifted instantly. I became warm, professional, and intrigued. Good morning. This is Emma Ramirez. Emma. The voice on the other end was deep and cautious. This is Marcus Thorne. To be honest, I did not expect this call. The street says you are signing with Barton this morning. The street is wrong. Marcus, I said, letting a little bit of steel bleed into my tone. We realize that our technology requires a partner with a more sustainable vision of the future. We are exploring other options for our asset integration. I would love to buy you lunch. There was a pause. I could hear Marcus thinking. He knew exactly what this meant. If I was calling him, the Wexler deal was dead. And if the Wexler deal was dead, Barton was vulnerable. I am free at noon. Marcus said, Perfect. I will see you then. I hung up. Mara stared at me. You just started a bidding war. No. I said, I just started a panic. By 8:15, the news had leaked. Financial blogs were the first to pick it up. Rumors swirl of Halcyon Wexler split. Then the major networks got wind of it. I watched the pre-market chart for Wexler Dominion. It had been trading flat at $12. At 8:20, it dipped to $11.50. At 8:30, when the rumor became a confirmed report that Halcyon had formally withdrawn, the line on the screen dropped vertically. It fell to $9 in seconds. My phone buzzed again. This time, the name on the screen was Reed. I stared at it. My thumb hovered over the decline button. I knew I should ignore him. This was business. But a part of me, the part that had spent 2 years loving him, needed to hear it. I needed to know if he was standing up or if he was still on his knees. I answered, Emma. His voice was high, tight with panic. There was shouting in the background. It sounded like glass breaking. Hello? Reed, what is happening? He yelled. My father is tearing the office apart. The legal team is running around like headless chickens. He says you pulled the deal. He says you sent a letter calling him toxic. I did, I said calmly. Why Reed sounded close to tears. Emma, you can't do this. You know how important this is. We can fix the dinner thing. I talked to my mother. She is going to talk to him. He was going to apologize. I leaned back in my chair. He wasn't going to apologize. Reed, he was going to accept my submission. There is a difference. But this destroys the company, Reed cried. Do you know what the stock is doing? I am watching my trust fund evaporate. Emma. I closed my eyes for a second. There it was. My trust fund. Not my father is hurt. Not our relationship is over. But my money is gone. Reed, listen to me, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the chaos on his end. I am not punishing you. I am not even punishing your father. I am ending the lie. You have been living in a cage made of gold, terrified of a man who stands on a foundation of debt. I am just opening the door. You are ruining us, he screamed. You are vindictive trash. Just like he said, the line went dead. I looked at the phone. It didn't hurt. It should have hurt. But it didn't. It felt like a fever breaking. He had finally said what he really thought. He was his father's son, after all. The fear had won. Mara was watching me. She didn't say anything. She just slid a piece of paper across the desk. The breakup fee, she said softly. The contract states that if we withdraw within 48 hours of the signing window for reasons other than fraud, we owe a penalty, $2 million. I looked at the number. $2 million. It was a lot of money. It was enough to fund a small startup. It was enough to buy a house in Lake Forest. Pay it, I said. Emma, pay it. I repeated. Wire it immediately. Send a confirmation receipt to Barton personally. Put in the subject line, settlement for non-disclosure of incompetence. Mara's eyes widened. That is aggressive. It is the price of my silence. I said, it is me buying my freedom, and it sends a message. It tells him that $2 million is nothing to me. It tells him I am not worried about the cost of war. The markets opened at 9:30. The opening bell rang, and Wexler Dominion opened at $8.50. It had lost 30% of its value in pre-market trading. The volume was massive. People were dumping the stock. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail. From Barton. I put it on speaker so Mara could hear. Barton's voice filled the room. It was not the smooth baritone voice of the gala donor. It was the guttural growl of a street fighter. You think you are clever, girl. You think you can walk away from me. You are nothing. You are a footnote. I made you relevant by letting you stand next to my son. You fix this. You call your lawyers, and you retract that letter, or I will bury you so deep in litigation you will need a submarine to find the sun. You do not say no to a Wexler. Call me back. Now. The message ended with a violent click. He sounded desperate. He sounded like a man who was used to shouting at the tide to stop coming in. He threatened me, but he begged me to call back. He was trying to command, but he was pleading. Save that. I told Mara, we might need it for the harassment suit later. I walked over to the large map of the Wexler corporate structure we had pinned to the wall. It was a spiderweb of subsidiaries, shell companies, and offshore accounts. But the heart of it was simple: debt. Get me the shareholder map, I said, pointing to the center of the web. And get me the list of every fund that holds their distressed debt. We already have the primary list, Mara said. But with the stock crashing this hard, the ownership is changing by the minute. The institutional investors are bailing out. The pension funds are selling. Who is buying, I asked. Mara checked her terminal. The vultures, distressed asset funds, high-risk speculators, and us, I said. Mara stopped typing. She looked at me. I want you to activate Northglass Capital, I said. Northglass Capital was a special-purpose vehicle I had set up 2 years ago. It had no obvious link to Halcyon Forge. It was just a generic investment fund managed by a law firm in New York. It was designed for hostile takeovers, though I had never used it for one. Until now. We are going to buy the company, Mara asked. No, I said. Buying the equity is a waste of money. The equity is worthless. I want the debt. I want the bonds. I want the loans. I traced a line on the map from the bank syndicate to the Wexler headquarters. If we own the debt, we own the leverage. When they breach their covenants, and they will breach them by Friday, at this rate the debt holders get to call the shots. The debt holders get to decide who runs the company. I turned to Mara. Barton thinks he can bully me because he thinks I'm just a potential partner. He thinks I am an outsider knocking on the door. He has no idea that I am about to become his landlord. How much do you want to allocate? Mara asked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Start with $50 million, I said. Buy the bonds that are panic selling. Pick them up for 60 cents, 50 cents, whatever you can get. Keep buying until we hit the disclosure threshold. I want a blocking position. I looked back at the window. The sun was fully up now, shining bright and cold on the city, somewhere in that concrete jungle. Barton Wexler was screaming at his assistants. He was probably calling senators, calling favors, trying to stop the bleeding. He was blaming me. He was blaming the market. He was blaming everyone but himself. He thinks he has the right to call my name, I said, watching the stock ticker flash red again. He thinks he can summon me like a servant. I turned my back on the window and walked toward the door. I had a lunch meeting with his worst enemy to prepare for, so I will call his debt. I said, and when I do, he's going to realize that he doesn't own the house anymore. He is just squatting in it. The silence I had purchased with my $2 million breakup fee lasted exactly 6 hours. By Monday afternoon, the war had shifted fronts. It moved from the sterile graphs of the stock market to the murky, poisonous waters of social warfare. Barton Wexler could not beat me on the balance sheet because he was broke. So he decided to beat me in the court of public opinion. He did not use press releases or lawsuits. He used whispers. It started with a phone call from the director of a nonprofit board I sat on. She sounded uncomfortable, her voice pitched a little too high. The way people sound when they are trying to be polite while holding a knife. She wanted to know if I was doing okay. She had heard rumors that I was under a lot of stress. She had heard I was making rash decisions. She suggested, ever so gently, that perhaps I should take a leave of absence to focus on my mental health. I hung up the phone and looked at Mara. He is calling them. I said, he is going down his contact list and telling everyone that I'm unstable. Mara nodded, scrolling through her tablet. It is a classic move. If he can paint you as a hysterical woman who blew up a business deal because of a lover's quarrel. He saves face. The stock price isn't tanking because his company is failing. It is tanking because an emotional woman made a chaotic decision. It shifts the blame from his incompetence to your psychology. Then the article dropped. It appeared on a mid-tier business opinion site, the kind that industry insiders read during their lunch break. It was anonymous, attributed only to sources close to the negotiation. The headline was brutal in its vagueness. The high cost of ego, how personal volatility derails corporate synergy. I read it in silence. It did not name me explicitly, but it didn't have to. It described a female founder of a boutique energy firm who walked away from a legacy partnership due to perceived slights and emotional fragility. It painted Barton as a patient patriarch trying to guide a spirited but erratic protégé. It painted me as a liability. This is fiction, Mara said, throwing the tablet onto the desk. We should sue the publisher. No, I said, staring at the screen. That is what he wants. If I sue, I look defensive. If I scream, I look crazy. He is trying to bait me into a public fight so he can say, "See, look how angry she is. Look how she cannot control herself." I walked to the window. The city looked the same, but it felt different. I felt the invisible eyes of the Chicago elite turning toward me, judging me based on a narrative written by a man who was currently drowning in debt. Then came the pressure on Reed. He did not call me this time. He sent a text, a long, rambling block of gray on my phone screen. He said his mother, Celeste, was devastated. He said she had been crying all morning. He said she told him that families stick together through hard times and that if I really loved him, I wouldn't try to destroy his inheritance. I could picture Celeste Wexler perfectly. She was a woman who had turned looking the other way into an Olympic sport. She knew Barton was a bully. She knew he was cruel, but she enjoyed the country club membership and the charity galas too much to care. Now, she was weaponizing her tears to force her son back into line. She wasn't protecting Reed. She was protecting the lifestyle that Reed's inheritance paid for. I didn't reply to the text. I couldn't tell Reed that his mother was a hostage who had fallen in love with her captor. He wasn't ready to hear that yet. At 4 o'clock, a courier arrived at the Halcyon Forge reception. He was carrying a thick cream-colored envelope with the Wexler Dominion crest embossed on the wax seal. It looked like a wedding invitation. I opened it in my office. It was a settlement agreement. I scanned the pages. It was a bribe, wrapped in the language of diplomacy. Barton was offering me a position on the Wexler Family Foundation Board. He was offering a consulting retainer of $500,000 a year for 3 years. He was offering to issue a joint press release stating that the merger was paused due to mutual strategic realignment, clearing my name of the emotional rumors. It looked generous. It looked like an olive branch. Then I turned to page 12, the non-disclosure agreement. It was the most aggressive silence clause I had ever seen. It didn't just cover trade secrets. It covered any and all observations, data, conversations, or impressions gathered during the due diligence process. It explicitly forbade me from discussing the financial health of Wexler Dominion with any third party, including regulators, banks, or the press. In perpetuity, I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that startled Mara. "He does not want me back," I said, tossing the contract onto the desk. "He is terrified." Mara picked up the document. "He is offering you $1.5 million in consulting fees to do nothing." Why? Because I saw the books. I said, "He doesn't care about Reed. He doesn't care about the humiliation at dinner. He cares that I know he is insolvent. He knows that if I talk to the right people, if I whisper to the SEC or the bank syndicate, his house of cards collapses immediately. This isn't a peace treaty. Mara, it is a gag order." "So we reject it?" Mara asked. I pulled out my pen, wrote "rejected" in large block letters across the front page. and signed it. "Send it back," I said, "and tell the courier to wait. I want Barton to get this within the hour." The rejection was risky. By refusing the settlement, I was keeping the war active. I was guaranteeing that the smear campaign would get worse. But I knew something Barton didn't. I knew that North Glass Capital, my shadow fund, had already acquired 12% of his distressed bonds in the last 6 hours. I didn't need his money. I was busy buying his mortgage. But the real blow didn't come from me. It came from the past. It was nearly 6 in the evening when the front desk called. Security said there was a woman in the lobby asking to see me. She didn't have an appointment. She said her name was Ivy Klein. I froze. I knew that name. Ivy Klein had been Barton Wexler's executive assistant for 15 years. She was the gatekeeper. She was the woman who managed his calendar, screened his calls, and likely knew where every skeleton in the Wexler closet was buried. "Send her up," I said instantly. Ivy looked different than the last time I had seen her at a Wexler gala. She was wearing a simple raincoat, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had spent the last 48 hours debating whether to ruin her own life. She stood in the doorway of my office, clutching a leather tote bag. "Ms. Ramirez," she said. Her voice was shaking. "Please, call me Emma," I said, gesturing to the chair opposite my desk. Mara stood by the window, silent, witnessing. Ivy sat down. She didn't take off her coat. "I heard about what happened at the dinner," she said. "I heard what he called you. Word travels fast." I said. Ivy looked down at her hands. "He has called me worse, for 15 years. He has called me idiot, incompetent, slow. He threw a stapler at me once because his coffee was cold. But I stayed. The pay was good. And I thought that was just how powerful men behaved." She looked up, and her eyes were wet. "But when I heard he called you trash, you, a woman who built her own company, a woman who tried to help him." Something snapped. I realized he doesn't just hate incompetence. He hates anyone he can't control. I nodded slowly. "He treats people like furniture. Ivy. Use them until they break, then replace them." Ivy reached into her bag. "That is why I am here. I quit this morning. I walked out while he was screaming at the legal team about the NDA. He didn't even notice I was gone until I was in the elevator." She pulled out a thick file folder and placed it on the glass desk. "I took these with me." She whispered. I opened the folder. It wasn't just emails. It was a log, a detailed, chronological log of meetings and directives. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Look at the revenue recognition for the last 2 quarters, Ivy said, pointing to a highlighted section. Barton was obsessed with the stock price. He needed to show growth to keep the credit lines open. So he created a subsidiary called WD Logistics. I scanned the documents. I saw the pattern immediately. Wexler Dominion was selling energy credits to WD Logistics at an inflated price, booking the revenue, and then lending WD Logistics the money to pay for it. "It is circular trading," I said, looking up at Mara. "They are selling nothing to themselves to make the revenue look higher. It is fraud," Mara said, stepping forward to look at the papers. "It is textbook securities fraud. If the SEC sees this, Barton goes to prison, not just bankruptcy, prison." Ivy nodded. "He made me type the contracts. He told me it was standard intercompany accounting, but I knew. I saw the emails where he told the CFO to make the numbers work or find a new job." I looked at Ivy. She was terrifyingly brave. She had just handed me a nuclear weapon. "Why bring this to me?" I asked. "You could have gone to the FBI?" Ivy met my gaze. "Because the FBI takes years. Because the FBI puts out a press release and then investigates for a decade. I want him to stop now. And I saw the look on your face when you left that dinner. You aren't just hurt, Emma. You are hunting." I closed the folder. I felt a heavy, cold weight in my stomach. This was it. This was the end of Barton Wexler. With these papers, I could destroy him by morning. I could leak this to the Wall Street Journal. And by noon, the FBI would be raiding his office. Mara looked at me, her eyes gleaming. "We leak it. Emma, tonight, we send copies to every major news outlet. He is finished. I ran my hand over the leather cover of the folder. It was tempting. God, it was tempting to watch him burn on live television, to watch the trash take out the trash. No, I said. Mara and Ivy both looked at me in shock. No, Mara asked. Emma, this is a crime. It is a crime. I agreed. And if we leak it now, it becomes a scandal. The stock goes to zero. The company liquidates. 5,000 employees lose their jobs. The pensions are wiped out. Barton goes to jail. Sure, but he takes everyone down with him, including Reed, including the innocent people working on the lines. I looked at Ivy. You want justice. Ivy, I want him to pay. She said, he will. I promised. But we are not going to burn the house down with the family inside. We are going to use this. I stood up and walked to the safe in the corner of my office. I placed the folder inside and locked it. We don't publish this yet. I said, this is our insurance. This is the card we play when he thinks he has won. I turned back to them. Barton is trying to destroy my reputation with rumors because he thinks this is a social game. He thinks he is fighting a girl who got her feelings hurt. He has no idea I am holding the evidence of his felony. I looked at Mara. Keep buying the debt. Accelerate the purchases. I want to own enough of his bonds that when the next covenant breach happens, and it will happen soon, I can force a shareholder meeting. And then Mara asked, and then I will walk into that boardroom. I said, not as a whistleblower, not as an angry ex-girlfriend, but as the majority creditor. And I will put that folder on the table in front of the entire board. I won't have to tell the press. The board will fire him to save themselves. Ivy let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for years. You are going to take his company. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. No, I am going to buy his company. And then I am going to fire him from the job he thinks is his birthright. I looked at my phone. There was another missed call from Barton. Let him scream, I said. Let him spread his rumors. Let him think he is winning the PR war. Because while he is busy running his mouth, we're going to be busy measuring him for a prison jumpsuit. I turned to Ivy. You are hired. By the way, double your salary. You start tomorrow as my executive archivist. Ivy smiled. The first genuine smile I had seen on her face. Thank you. Go home, I told her. Sleep. The war is just getting started. But you are on the winning side now. As Ivy left, I looked out at the city lights again. Barton Wexler had called me trash. He had tried to buy my silence with a board seat. He had tried to shame me with rumors. He had made one critical mistake. He forgot that when you treat people like dirt, eventually the dirt buries you. I had the money. I had the debt. And now, thanks to Ivy, I had the truth. The next time I saw Barton Wexler, he wouldn't be sitting at the head of the table. He would be on the menu. Wednesday morning broke with a deceptive calm over Chicago. The sky was a bruised purple, clearing slowly into a pale, indifferent blue. Inside the conference room at Halcyon Forge, however, the atmosphere was kinetic. We were not sleeping. We were hunting. Mara Venn looked up from her laptop, her eyes rimmed with red but bright with adrenaline. She had been on the phone with 3 different brokerage firms in London and Hong Kong since 4 a.m. We have a situation, Mara said, sliding a sheet of paper across the polished granite table. The news about the cancelled merger has spooked the bond market even more than we anticipated. The vultures are circling. There are 3 major hedge funds dumping Wexler Dominion debt. They want out before the ship sinks. I picked up the paper. It was a list of bond offerings, specifically the Series B and Series C notes that were unsecured. They were trading at 40 cents on the dollar. The market had decided that Barton Wexler was not going to pay his bills. We can buy this, Mara said, her voice dropping. But we have to move now. If we wait until lunch, the distress funds like BlackRock or Oaktree will swoop in and pick the carcass clean. We need liquidity. Emma, a lot of it. And we need a vehicle to buy it without Barton seeing your name on the trade ticket. I walked over to the coffee machine and poured a black coffee. The steam rose in a thin gray ribbon. You think we are reacting to this? Mara, I asked, taking a sip, you think I'm scrambling to find a way to hurt him? Mara frowned. Well, we just got the fraud evidence from Ivy last night, and the deal fell apart on Monday. So yes, I assumed we were improvising. I turned to face her. I set the mug down on a coaster, opened the file for North Glass Capital. I said, Mara typed the name into the secure server. North Glass was a shell entity I had created 8 months ago, to Mara, and to everyone else. It was just a passive investment vehicle I used to park excess cash from Halcyon's patent royalties. She opened the portfolio summary. Her jaw dropped. Emma, she whispered, you already own Wexler debt. I nodded. 8 months ago, I saw the energy market shifting. I saw the pivot to renewables, and I saw that dinosaurs like Wexler Dominion were too heavy to turn. I knew that eventually, an eagle would break its wing. So I created Northglass to catch the feathers. I walked over to the screen. I have been accumulating their bonds for the last 2 quarters. I explained, just small amounts, 5 million here, 10 million there. Nothing big enough to trigger a disclosure requirement, but enough to give me a toehold. Mara stared at the numbers. You have $30 million in face value bonds already sitting in this account, and I bought them when they were trading at 90 cents. I said, so I paid a premium compared to today, but that does not matter. What matters is the standing. I tapped the screen. Northglass isn't just a buyer. Mara, Northglass is a creditor of record. We do not need to wait for the settlement period. We have standing right now to demand a meeting with the CFO regarding the covenant breaches. Mara looked at me with a mixture of fear and admiration. You didn't just build a shelter in case it rained. You dug a grave in case he died. I did. I admitted. I just never thought I would be the one pushing him into it. But now that we are here, we are going to use the foundation I laid. I looked at the list of dumping bonds Mara had shown me earlier. Clear the liquidity reserves. I ordered, everything we have in the war chest, buy it all. Every bond that hits the market at 40 cents. We take. I want Northglass to move from a minor creditor to the majority holder of the unsecured tranche by noon. Mara's fingers flew across the keyboard. $50 million allocated. Orders are going out. We are sweeping the floor. Emma, while Mara executed the trades, I went back to my desk. It was time to use the ammunition Ivy Klein had given me. The folder containing the evidence of circular trading was sitting in my safe. I didn't need to open it again. I had memorized the account numbers, WD Logistics, the inflated invoices, the fake revenue. If I released this to the press, Barton would be destroyed, but the company would implode. The assets would be tied up in federal investigations for years. Halcyon Forge would never get the technology integration we needed. I didn't want a crater. I wanted a conquest. So I wrote a letter. It was not addressed to the public. It was addressed to the Board of Directors of Wexler Dominion, to the Board of Directors, acting on behalf of Northglass Capital, a major holder of Wexler Dominion debt obligations. We are formally notifying you of a material breach of fiduciary duty and potential securities fraud. We are in possession of internal communications and accounting logs, indicating that executive leadership has artificially inflated revenue through circular transactions with non-consolidated entities. I paused. The next sentence had to be the kill shot. We are not alerting the Securities and Exchange Commission at this hour. We are giving the board a 12-hour window to initiate an independent internal investigation and to immediately suspend Barton Wexler from all executive functions pending the result of said inquiry. Failure to act will be construed as complicity in a felony scheme to defraud creditors. I signed it simply Northglass Capital Management. I sent it. The clock on the wall read 10 in the morning. Now we wait. I said to Mara, the reaction inside the Wexler boardroom would be predictable. Panic, absolute, unadulterated panic. These were men and women who sat on boards for the prestige and the stock options. They were not criminals. They were wealthy, comfortable people who were terrified of liability. If they ignored my letter and the fraud came out later, they could be personally sued. They could lose their own fortunes. They could go to jail. Barton ruled them by fear, but the fear of prison was stronger than the fear of Barton. 30 minutes passed. The trading terminal showed Northglass was devouring the bonds. We were up to $80 million in face value. We were becoming the whale in the pool. Then, my personal phone pinged. It was a text message. It was not from a number I had saved, but I recognized the area code. If you want the table, you need someone to open the meeting room door. I stared at the screen. My heart skipped a beat. Who is it? Mara asked. Seeing my expression, I smiled. It was a cold, tight smile. It is June Harrow. I said. Mara frowned. The venture capitalist. She is on the Wexler board. Yes, I said. 5 years ago, before Halcyon was big, I did some consulting work for a startup she was looking to acquire. I found a flaw in their code that would have cost her fund $20 million. I saved her from a bad deal. She told me she owed me one. I looked at the text again. June was smart. She knew Northglass was me. She must have recognized the style, or perhaps she just knew that no one else had the motive to strike this hard and this fast. She is inside. I said. She got the letter. I typed a reply. I am outside the gate. Let me in. The response came back instantly. Emergency board meeting is being called for 2 o'clock. Barton is trying to block it. He is screaming about a conspiracy. The general counsel is sweating through his shirt. Send the proof to my private email. I will put it on the screen. I looked at Mara. Scan the documents Ivy gave us. Redact Ivy's name. Send them to June Harrow. Mara hesitated. If we give them the proof, do we lose our leverage? No. I said, the proof is the key. The leverage is the debt. Once June shows them the fake invoices, the board will have no choice. They will have to declare Barton a liability, and once he is suspended, the default clauses in the bank loans trigger automatically. Why, Mara asked. Because most corporate loans have a key man clause, I explained, or a change of control provision. If the CEO is removed for cause, especially for fraud, the banks get nervous, they call the loans, and Wexler Dominion doesn't have the cash to pay them. I stood up and walked to the window. That is when Northglass steps in. I finished. When the banks demand payment, we will be there. We will offer to restructure the debt. We will offer a lifeline, but the price of the lifeline will be control. I watched the traffic crawling on the street below. It was a beautiful, intricate machine I had built. I wasn't just reacting to an insult anymore. I was dismantling an empire with the precision of a master watchmaker. June's text had confirmed it. The board was fracturing. Barton was losing his grip. He was shouting about conspiracies while his own directors were checking their legal insurance policies. I turned back to Mara. Get the car ready, I said. Where are we going? We are going to the Wexler headquarters. I said, the meeting is at 2. I don't plan to be in the room, but I want to be close enough to hear the crash. But Emma, Mara warned, if you show up there, the press will see you. Let them, I said, let them see the woman Barton called trash standing on his doorstep, while his own board locks him out. I grabbed my coat. Barton thought he was playing poker. He thought he could bluff me with NDA agreements and social pressure. He didn't realize we were playing chess. And he didn't realize that I had moved my queen into position 3 moves ago. June Harrow was the rook I had forgotten I had, and she was about to deliver checkmate. As we walked to the elevator, I checked the bond prices one last time. Wexler debt had stabilized slightly, likely because someone U.S. was buying everything in sight. The market was confused. They didn't know who was betting on the sinking ship. They would find out soon enough. I am not just buying a company. Mara, I said as the elevator doors closed, I am buying a verdict. The elevator doors to my private floor slid open with a soft chime, revealing a man who looked like he had aged 10 years in 3 days. Reed Wexler stood there, his designer suit rumpled, his tie loosened, and his eyes hollowed out by sleeplessness. He did not look like the heir to an energy empire. He looked like a refugee from a war zone. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing the latest bond purchase reports from Northglass, but I closed the laptop as he walked in. Security had alerted me that he was coming. I had debated turning him away, but the tone of his voice when he spoke to the receptionist, quiet, broken, defeated, had made me curious. He stopped in the middle of the room, looking around at the glass walls and the hum of activity from the outer office. He looked out of place here. My world was built on transparency and efficiency. His was built on velvet ropes and closed doors. "I did not come to argue," Reed said, his voice rough. "I did not come to ask you to take him back." I motioned to the chair opposite me. "Sit down, Reed." He sat, but he didn't lean back. He perched on the edge of the leather seat, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. He looked at the floor for a long time before he spoke. "I always told myself it was discipline," he said quietly. "Growing up, when he would make me sit at the dinner table for 4 hours until I recited the quarterly earnings correctly, when he would cancel my birthday parties because the stock dipped, I told myself he was just making me strong. He was preparing me for the burden of the name." I watched him. I had seen flashes of this Reed before, usually late at night after a bottle of wine, but he had always pulled back, terrified of betraying the patriarch. "It wasn't discipline, was it?" Reed asked, finally looking up at me. "It was training, like you train a dog." I nodded slowly. "It was control. Reed, he wasn't raising a son, he was manufacturing a successor." Reed reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded document. The paper looked old, worn at the creases. "Do you know why I didn't stand up for you at dinner?" he asked. "It wasn't just fear, it wasn't just cowardice, although I know that is what you think." I didn't answer. I let him speak. "It is this," he said, sliding the paper across the desk. I picked it up. It was a legal document, dated 10 years ago. It was a durable power of attorney and a permanent proxy voting agreement. It granted Barton Wexler the irrevocable right to vote Reed's shares in Wexler Dominion on all corporate matters until Barton's death or incapacitation. I read the legal jargon. It was ironclad. On paper, Reed was a wealthy shareholder. In reality, he was a silent partner with zero agency. Barton had legally stripped his own son of his voice a decade ago. "He made me sign this when I was 27, Reed said. "He told me it was a formality. He said it was to protect the family from hostile takeovers. He said if I trusted him, I would sign it. So I did. Because in my family, trust isn't earned, it is demanded." I looked at the signature. A younger Reed, eager to please, signing away his freedom. "He owns you," I said softly. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. Reed nodded. If I went against him, if I voted against him, he could sue me for breach of contract. He could strip me of my trust. He could leave me with nothing. That night at dinner, when I looked at him, I didn't see my father. I saw my boss. I saw the man who held the deed to my life. He took a deep breath, and his shoulders shook. "But then I saw you walk out," he said. "You walked out past the security, past the money, past the fear. You just got in your car and drove away." And I realized that I've been sitting at that table for 37 years, eating his insults, because I was too afraid to be poor. I leaned forward. "Reed, you aren't here to explain yourself to me. Why are you here?" Reed looked at the proxy agreement on my desk. "I want to cancel it," he said. I paused. This was significant. If Reed revoked the proxy, he would regain control of his shares. It wasn't a majority. But combined with the debt I was buying, it was a critical block of votes. You know what he will do. I warned him. He will cut you off. He will freeze your accounts. He will ensure you never work in this industry again. He will burn your inheritance to the ground before he lets you defy him. "I know," Reed said. His voice was steadier now. He sounded less like a child and more like a man who had accepted his fate. "Let him keep the money. Let him keep the house in Lake Forest. I don't want it. I don't want the legacy if the price is my soul." He looked at me, his eyes clear for the first time in years. "You asked me once, when we first started dating, what I wanted to do with my life." Reed said, "Do you remember what I said?" I smiled faintly. "You said you didn't know because you had never been asked." Reed reached for a pen from my desk cup. "I want to live my own life, Emma. Even if it is a small life, even if it is a messy life, I don't want to be his retirement plan anymore." He took the document, drew a large X through the front page, and wrote, "Revoked" in bold letters at the top. He signed it and dated it with today's date. "I need a notary to make it official," he said, "and then I am sending a copy to the board and to the SEC. I pressed the intercom button. "Mara, can you bring the notary stamp in here? And get the general counsel?" Reed sat back, and for the first time since he walked in, he exhaled fully. The tension that had held his body in a permanent flinch seemed to dissolve. He wasn't happy he was about to lose his family fortune, but he was free. After the notary left, and the document was sealed, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered it on speaker, sensing the shift in the room. "Hello, Emma." The voice was trembling, cultured, but thin. It was a voice used to whispering in corners. "Hello, Celeste," I said. Reed stiffened, looking at the phone. "I am sorry to call you." Celeste Wexler said, "I had to wait until the staff left the room. Barton has the house on lockdown. He is pacing the library like a caged animal. He says you are destroying us. I am not destroying you." "Celeste," I said, calm, "I am exposing the rot in the foundation. There is a difference." There was a silence on the line. Then, a sound I didn't expect. A short, sharp intake of breath. A sob. "He called me stupid on our honeymoon." Celeste whispered, 40 years ago, I dropped a glass of wine on the carpet, and he called me a clumsy, stupid cow. And I laughed. I laughed because I wanted to keep the peace. I wanted to be the perfect wife." She paused, and her voice hardened slightly. "I watched him do it to Reed. I watched him break my son piece by piece, and I told myself it was for his own good. I told myself that was the price of admission to this life. Why are you telling me this?" "Celeste," I asked. "Because I saw you leave," she said. "I saw you stand up. In 40 years, no one has ever stood up to him. Not once. We all just adjusted. We made ourselves smaller so he would have more room." I looked at Reed. He had his head in his hands, listening to his mother's confession. "You don't have to stay small." "Celeste," I said, "I am too old to leave." "Emma," she said, her voice sounding incredibly weary, "I have forgotten how to be anyone other than Mrs. Barton Wexler. But Reed, tell Reed to run. Tell him not to come back. Tell him his mother says the inheritance isn't worth the silence." Reed leaned toward the phone. "Mom." "Oh, Reed." She wept. "I am so sorry. I should have protected you. I was so busy protecting the image that I forgot to protect my son." Reed's eyes filled with tears. "It is okay, Mom. I am out. I just revoked the proxy." "You did?" Celeste gasped. "Then he will try to crush you. Let him try," Reed said. "I am not alone." Celeste sniffled. "Emma." "Yes. Celeste, thank you," she said. "You don't have to forgive me. You don't have to like me. But thank you for showing my son that the door was unlocked." The line clicked dead. The room was silent. The air felt heavy with the ghosts of a dysfunctional family finally stepping into the light. Reed wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He didn't look embarrassed. He looked relieved. "He thinks I am weak," Reed said, staring at the revoked proxy. "He thinks I will come crawling back the moment he cuts my credit cards." "Will you?" I asked. Reed shook his head. "No, I have some savings in an account he doesn't know about. It is not millions, but it is enough to start over. Maybe I will finally open that architecture firm I talked about in college. Maybe I will just disappear for a while." He looked at me. "But before I go, I want to help you finish this. I don't need your help to buy the company." "Reed," I said, "Northglass has already acquired a blocking position in the debt. We have the fraud evidence. The board meeting is at 2 o'clock. "I know," Reed said. "But you need a witness." I frowned. "A witness?" "The fraud," Reed said. "Ivy gave you the documents, right? The fake invoices." I nodded. "Those documents prove the crime," Reed said. "But they don't prove intent. Barton will blame the CFO. He will say he didn't know. He will say it was a rogue employee. He always finds a scapegoat." Reed stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the city he had lived in his whole life but never really seen. But I was there. He said, I was in the room when he told the CFO to do it. I heard him say, "Cook the books or clear your desk." I can testify to his direct involvement. I can corroborate Ivy's documents. I stared at him. Reed, if you do that, you are not just leaving the family. You are actively sending your father to prison. Reed turned back to me. His face was set in stone. He sent himself to prison the moment he decided the law didn't apply to him. I am just the one turning on the lights. It was a powerful offer. With Reed's testimony, Barton would have no defense, no wiggle room, no way to spin this as a misunderstanding. It would be the final nail in the coffin. Are you sure? I asked. Once you say it on the record, there is no going back. I am sure, Reed said. He walked over to the desk and extended his hand. It was a formal gesture, businesslike. Stripping away the romance that had once existed between us, we weren't lovers anymore. We were partners in a demolition project. I took his hand. It was warm and firm. We have a deal, I said. Reed smiled, a sad, small smile. You know, Emma, he said. He was right about one thing. You are dangerous. I raised an eyebrow. Dangerous. You make people realize they don't have to be afraid, Reed said. That is the most dangerous thing in the world to a man like my father. He checked his watch. The board meeting is in 3 hours. Do you want me to ride with you? I said, it is better if we arrive separately. I will go in as the creditor. You come in as the shareholder. We flank him. Reed nodded. He picked up his revoked proxy form. I will see you there. Emma. He turned and walked toward the elevator. He walked differently now. His spine was straight. His head was up. He wasn't the hunched, terrified man who had sat at the dinner table on Saturday night. He was his own man. I watched him go, feeling a strange sense of closure. I hadn't just bought a company. I had broken a curse. I picked up my phone and dialed Mara. Get the car, I said, and call June Harrow. Tell her to save a seat for Reed Wexler. Why? Mara asked. Is he coming to beg for his allowance? No, I said, looking at the empty doorway where Reed had stood. He is coming to bury the king. I gathered the files on my desk, the fraud evidence, the bond certificates, the settlement rejection. Everything was in place. Celeste's words echoed in my mind. Stop standing with cruelty. That was the key. We weren't winning because we were richer. We weren't winning because we were smarter. We were winning because we had stopped being afraid of the monster in the corner. We had turned on the lights and realized he was just a small, angry man with a lot of debt. I walked out of my office, ready for the endgame. The drive to the Wexler headquarters would take 30 minutes. It was time to go collect the rent. The boardroom of Wexler Dominion was designed to intimidate. It was a cavernous space on the 45th floor, paneled in dark walnut that had been harvested before I was born, with a view of Chicago that reduced the rest of the world to insignificant specks. At the head of the 30-foot table sat Barton Wexler. He did not look like a man under siege. He looked like a monarch holding court. He was leaning back in his leather chair, checking his watch with an air of theatrical boredom, as if the emergency meeting called by his own board was merely an inconvenience to his tea time. Around the table, the 12 board members sat in various states of anxiety. Some were checking their phones, watching the stock price bleed. Others were shuffling papers, refusing to make eye contact with the man at the head of the table. They were the old guard, men and women who had collected checks for years by nodding when Barton spoke. Today, they looked like passengers on a plane that had just lost its engines. The double doors opened, and I walked in. I was not wearing the soft, approachable pastels I had worn to the dinner in Lake Forest. I was wearing a charcoal suit, sharp and tailored, with heels that clicked against the marble floor like a ticking clock. Reed walked beside me, silent and pale, but moving with a steady gait. Barton looked up. His eyes narrowed, and a sneer curled his lip. "This is a closed session," he barked, his voice booming off the wood paneling. "Security. Why is she here? And Reed, take your seat. You are late." The 2 security guards by the door took a step forward. But June Harrow raised her hand. She was sitting 3 seats down from Barton, a silver-haired venture capitalist with eyes like flint. "She stays," June said calmly. Barton slammed his hand on the table. "Excuse me, this is a board meeting, June, not a social club for my son's ex-girlfriends. Get her out. She is not here as a guest." "Barton," June said, her voice cutting through his bluster. "She is here as a representative of North Glass Capital." Barton froze. The name clearly meant nothing to him, which was exactly the point. He looked at me, confusion warring with his arrogance. "Northglass," he scoffed. "What is that? Some shell company you set up to buy a few shares? You need a minimum threshold to attend a shareholder meeting. Emma, you don't have it." I walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. I placed my briefcase on the mahogany surface. I did not sit down. I wanted to tower over the room. North Glass Capital is the primary holder of your Series B and Series C unsecured notes. I said. My voice was steady, projecting to the back of the room. "As of this morning, we hold $85 million of Wexler Dominion debt. That makes us your largest creditor outside of the bank syndicate, and under the terms of the bond indenture, we have the right to be present when the board discusses matters of solvency." The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Barton stared at me, his face drained of color, then flushed a violent, angry red. "You bought the bonds," he hissed. "You bought my debt. I bought your leverage," I corrected, "and I am here to make sure you don't crash the company before I get paid back." Barton laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "This is ridiculous. You are bluffing. You don't have that kind of liquidity. Check the register," I said, nodding toward the general counsel. A man named Marcus, who looked like he was about to faint. Marcus looked at his tablet. He tapped the screen, his fingers trembling. He looked up at Barton, his face gray. "It is confirmed. Mr. Wexler," Marcus whispered. "North Glass Capital executed a block trade at 10 this morning. They hold the position. She has standing." Barton gripped the arms of his chair. His knuckles were white. He looked at Reed. "And you?" he demanded. "You are sitting next to her. You are siding with the vulture who is trying to pick your inheritance clean." Reed did not flinch. He placed the revoked proxy form on the table and slid it toward the general counsel. "I am not sitting here as your son, Dad," Reed said quietly. "I am sitting here as a shareholder who has revoked his proxy. I am voting my own shares today." Barton looked as if he had been slapped. The betrayal of the son was sharper than the attack of the enemy. But before he could explode, June Harrow leaned forward. "We have a more pressing issue than family dynamics," June said. She picked up a file folder, the one Ivy had given me. With the names redacted, and held it up. "The board has received a formal notice from North Glass Capital alleging securities fraud," June stated. Barton waved his hand dismissively. "It is a fabrication. She is trying to blackmail us." "Is it?" June asked. She opened the folder and took out a sheet of paper. "This is an email dated 3 months ago. It directs the finance department to recognize revenue from WD Logistics for energy credits that were never transferred. It explicitly states, and I quote, 'Make the numbers work or find a new job.'" June looked directly at Barton. "The email was sent from your private account." "Barton." The air in the room grew heavy. The other board members were leaning in, their eyes wide. This wasn't mismanagement. This was a felony. Barton stood up. He was a large man, and he used his size to intimidate. "This is a witch hunt," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She stole internal documents. That is corporate espionage. I will have you arrested." I didn't blink. The documents were provided by a whistleblower under the protection of federal law. I lied smoothly. Ivy wasn't officially protected yet, but he didn't know that, and the content of the documents has been verified by cross-referencing your public filings. You are booking fake revenue to hide a liquidity crisis. Barton turned to the other board members. "Are you going to listen to this? I built this company. I took it from a regional utility to a national empire. You all got rich because of me. And now you are going to let this outsider dictate terms because she stole some emails." He looked at Reed again, his eyes pleading for loyalty. Reed. Tell them, Barton commanded. Tell them this is a lie. You know how we operate. You know I would never jeopardize the company. Reed looked at his father. For a moment, the room hung on his answer. I cannot do that, Reed said. Barton's face contorted. Why? Because she has you on a leash. You are going to betray your own blood for a woman who just wants to humiliate us. Reed stood up slowly. He looked at me, then back at his father. I am not betraying you because of her, Reed said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of silence ending. I am betraying you because you treat people like trash. You treated her like trash at dinner. You treat your employees like trash. And you treated me like an asset you could depreciate. Reed pointed at the file in June's hand. I was there, Reed said. I heard you give the order. I heard you tell the CFO to cook the books. I didn't say anything then because I was a coward. But I am saying it now. It is true. The admission hit the room like a physical blow, a direct witness, a family member. There was no coming back from that. The general counsel cleared his throat. It sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Mr. Wexler, he said, his voice shaking, under the corporate bylaws, and given the credible allegation of criminal misconduct, the board is required to initiate an immediate independent investigation. And June Harrow added, we must discuss the suspension of executive powers pending the outcome of that investigation. Barton looked around the table. He saw the faces of men and women he had bullied for years. He saw them looking away, checking their notes, refusing to meet his eyes. He realized, perhaps for the first time in his life, that he had lost the room. He sat down heavily. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a desperate, cunning calculation. He turned to me, his face smoothed out. He forced a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. Okay, he said. He spread his hands on the table. Okay, you made your point. Emma, he chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. I underestimated you. I admit it. You have teeth. I like that. We need that kind of fire in this family. He leaned forward, ignoring the rest of the board. Look, let us stop this theater. You want the deal? You have the deal. We will reinstate the Halcyon partnership. I will give you better terms. I will give you a seat on the board right now. We can fire the CFO and blame it on him. Reed can have his little rebellion. And then we bring him back as vice chairman. He looked at me with what he thought was benevolence. I accept you. Emma, you proved you are strong enough to be a Wexler. Welcome to the family. Let us shake hands and make some money. It was breathtaking. Even now, with the noose around his neck, he thought he was the one granting favors. He thought I had done all of this just to get his approval. He thought I wanted to be him. I looked at him. I looked at the gold cufflinks, the expensive suit, the desperate eyes of a man who thought everything had a price. I am not looking for a father. Barton, I said, the smile faltered on his face, and I am not looking for a seat at your table. I continued, I bought the debt because I intend to foreclose on the table. I turned to June Harrow. North Glass Capital formally requests a vote on the suspension of the CEO. I said, if the board refuses to act in the face of this evidence, we will file an emergency injunction with the Delaware Court of Chancery this afternoon and pierce the corporate veil to hold each director personally liable for the subsequent losses. The board members stiffened. Personal liability, the magic words. June Harrow looked around the table. I moved to suspend Barton Wexler from all executive duties, effective immediately, pending the results of an external audit, she said. Seconded, said a man at the far end of the table, the representative from the Teachers' Pension Fund. All in favor. June asked, one by one. The hands went up. The general counsel, the pension fund rep, the quiet woman from the tech sector, even the old guard, seeing the ship sinking, raised their hands. Reed raised his hand last. He didn't look at his father. He looked at the table. Barton watched the hands go up. He looked like a man watching his own funeral. He didn't scream. He didn't shout. He just stared at the table, his mouth opening and closing silently. The motion carries. June said, Barton, Please surrender your company phone and access badge. Security will escort you to the garage. Barton stood up. He looked smaller than he had 10 minutes ago. He looked at me one last time. There was no anger left in his eyes, only shock. "You are ruining a legacy," he whispered. I shook my head. "No, Barton. I am calling in the loan." He walked to the door. The security guards, men he had paid for years, stepped aside to let him pass, then fell in step behind him. He wasn't the king anymore. He was a liability being escorted off the premises. As the door closed behind him, the room exhaled. But the silence didn't last. The general counsel's phone buzzed, then June's tablet lit up. "The news is out," Marcus said, looking at his screen. "Bloomberg just ran the alert. Wexler Dominion, CEO, suspended amid fraud probe." "What is the stock doing?" June asked. "It is in free fall," Marcus said, "down 40% in 10 minutes. Trading has been halted by the exchange." June looked at me. "This is a disaster. The banks will accelerate the loans by close of business. We will be insolvent by tomorrow morning." I stood up and picked up my briefcase. "That is exactly what I'm counting on," I said. The board looked at me in confusion. "Why?" June asked. "You hold the debt. If we go bankrupt, you lose $80 million. I smiled. "I am not here to liquidate you." "June, I am here to rescue you. But I can't rescue a company that Barton controls. Now that he is gone, and now that the stock is worthless, we can talk about the real deal." I walked to the door, stopping next to Reed. "I am going to let the market panic for exactly 24 hours. I said, "I want every weak hand to sell. I want the price to hit rock bottom." And then Reed asked, "And then Northglass Capital will make an offer to convert our debt into equity." I said, "We will take control of the company, not through a merger, but through a restructuring." I looked back at the board members, who were staring at me with a mix of fear and hope. "Get your audit committee started," I told them, "and tell the banks to call me. I am the only person in this city with enough cash to keep the lights on." I walked out of the boardroom, Reed at my side. "We did it," Reed whispered as we reached the elevator. "He is gone. He is gone." I agreed. "But the body is still warm. Now we have to buy the coffin." The elevator descended. The numbers on the display counted down. 40, 30, 20. It felt like a countdown to a launch. The market was burning Barton Wexler's legacy to the ground, and I was standing there with the blueprints for what would rise from the ashes. The hardest part was over. I had killed the king. Now I just had to buy the kingdom. The financial world does not scream when it dies. It just flashes red. I stood in the center of the Halcyon Forge operations room, watching the monitors on the wall. It was a sea of crimson. The trading algorithm we had built for Northglass Capital was running hot, executing buy orders faster than a human finger could click a mouse. The news of Barton Wexler's suspension and the fraud investigation had hit the wire services at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon. By 2:30, the market had decided that Wexler Dominion was radioactive. The stock, which had opened the week at $12, was now trading at $3.50. But I wasn't looking at the stock. Equity was vanity. I was looking at the debt. The bonds were in free fall. The institutional investors, the pension funds, the university endowments, the insurance companies were dumping them. They were legally required to sell assets that dropped below investment grade, and Wexler Dominion had just been downgraded to junk status by all 3 rating agencies in a synchronized execution. "This is it," Mara shouted over the hum of the servers. "The Series D notes just hit 30 cents on the dollar. The market is pricing in a total liquidation. Buy them." I ordered. My voice was calm, a stark contrast to the chaos on the screens. "Buy everything. Don't leave a single certificate on the floor." It was like watching snow fall in a blizzard. Every time a panic-stricken fund manager in New York or London hit sell, Northglass Capital was there to catch it. We were buying dollar bills for 30 cents. We were buying the right to control the company for the price of a used car. My phone rang. It was Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Redwood Utilities. I picked up, putting on my best stressed but determined voice. Marcus, I said, I am a little busy. I saw the news. Emma, Marcus said, his voice booming with satisfaction. Barton is out. The stock is a penny stock. The company is dead in the water. I assume you are ready to sell me the halcyon technology now. There is no way you are still partnering with those corpses. I walked to the window. Watching the Chicago skyline, I needed Marcus to be hungry. I needed him to be the shark circling the boat so the Wexler board would be terrified enough to let me on board. I am looking at my options. Marcus, I lied. But the Wexler infrastructure is still valuable. If they go into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, a judge might strip the assets and sell them off piecemeal. Don't be an idiot, Marcus snapped. Let them drown. Bring your tech to Redwood. We will announce the partnership tomorrow. I will even offer to buy the scraps of Wexler Dominion once the bank forecloses. We can pick the carcass clean together. I let silence hang on the line for 3 seconds. I will keep that in mind. Marcus, I said, but I have one more meeting with their board. I hung up. I didn't need Marcus. I just needed the Wexler board to know that he was waiting at the gate with a sledgehammer. I turned back to Mara. Status. We have cleared the market, Mara said, looking up with wide eyes. Northglass now owns 62% of the unsecured debt. We are the majority creditor, but there is a problem. There is a block of bonds held by a distressed asset fund in Connecticut. They are holding out. They have enough voting power to block a restructuring plan if they want to force a liquidation. Get them on the video conference. I said, now. 5 minutes later, the face of a hedge fund manager named Silas appeared on the main screen. He looked tired and cynical. Ms. Ramirez, Silas said, my analysts tell me you are the money behind Northglass. You are buying a burning building. I am buying the land. Silas, I corrected. And I know you are holding $20 million in face value bonds. You bought them at 80. They are worth 30 right now. You are looking at a $10 million loss on your balance sheet. Silas shrugged. I can write off the loss, but if I force liquidation, I might get 40 cents on the dollar from the asset sale. Why should I sell to you because liquidation takes 5 years? I said, leaning into the camera. The lawyers will eat the first $10 million. The bankruptcy trustee will eat the next 5. By the time you get a check, inflation will have eaten the rest. I paused to let that sink in. Or, I continued, you transfer your voting rights to Northglass today. You support my restructuring plan. In exchange, I guarantee your position. When I turn the company around, I will pay you out at par value within 36 months, 100 cents on the dollar. You turn a loss into a profit. You just have to be patient. Silas narrowed his eyes. You think you can turn it around? The brand is toxic. Barton Wexler is a crook. Barton is gone. I said, and I am not Barton. I am Halcyon Forge. I have the technology to make those old power plants profitable again. You know my track record. Silas looked at his screen, then back at me. I want to guarantee that there will be no asset stripping, he said. I don't want you selling the copper wire out of the walls. I promise a constructive restructuring. I said, no liquidation, no mass layoffs. We keep the engine running. Silas nodded slowly. Send over the agreement. You have our proxy. I cut the feed. That is it, Mara said. Exhaling a breath she seemed to have been holding since dawn. We have the supermajority. We control the debt stack. I checked my watch. It was 4 o'clock. The market had closed. The dust was settling. Call June Harrow. I said, tell the board I am coming back, and tell them to bring their lawyers. The atmosphere in the Wexler boardroom had shifted from panic to exhaustion. The pizza boxes on the sidebar were untouched. The coffee was cold. When I walked in this time, nobody asked why I was there. They looked at me like shipwreck survivors watching a rescue boat. June Harrow met me at the door. The banks called the loans, she whispered. They gave us 48 hours to cure the default. We don't have the cash. We are looking at filing for bankruptcy tomorrow morning. I walked to the head of the table, the chair where Barton used to sit. I didn't sit in it. I stood behind it, placing my hands on the leather backrest. You don't have to file for bankruptcy, I announced. The board members looked up. Northglass Capital is prepared to execute a debt-for-equity swap. I said, we will forgive the $80 million in bonds we hold. In exchange, we take a 90% equity stake in the new company. Wait, said the general counsel. That wipes out the existing shareholders. The existing shareholders own stock in a company that is worth negative dollars. I said bluntly, the equity is already zero. I am offering to keep the company alive. I am offering to assume the bank debt and guarantee the payroll. I looked around the room, and I am offering to keep the operations intact. No fire sale. No breaking up the grid to sell to Redwood Utilities. Your employees keep their jobs. Your pensioners keep their benefits. June looked at the proposal I had slid across the table. This is a takeover, she said. It is a rescue, I corrected. There was a murmur of assent. They knew it was the only way out. But then, a man from the compensation committee cleared his throat. What about Barton's contract, he asked. He has a golden parachute clause. If he is terminated, even for cause, he is owed a consulting fee of $3 million a year for 10 years. It is in his employment agreement. He calls it an advisor emeritus role. I laughed. It was a cold sound. Read the fine print on page 42 of his contract. I said, I had memorized it during due diligence. The general counsel flipped through the binder. The advisor clause is void if the executive is found to have engaged in gross misconduct resulting in material financial harm to the corporation. I quoted from memory. I pointed to the fraud evidence file that was still sitting in the center of the table. He cooked the books. He triggered a default. He destroyed the stock value. That is the definition of material harm. Barton Wexler leaves with nothing. No severance, no consulting fee, no office. He doesn't even get to keep his company car. The board members looked at each other. They were terrified of Barton, but they were more terrified of being sued by shareholders for paying millions to a fraudster. Void it, June said firmly. We cancel the contract immediately. I nodded. Good. Now, there is one more thing. I turned to Reed. He was sitting quietly at the far end of the table. For this deal to pass regulatory scrutiny, it has to be clean. I said, the SEC will be looking for any sign of insider dealing. They will look at Reed. They will say he is a family member who helped orchestrate the takeover. Reed stood up. He looked at the board. I have already prepared a letter of resignation from the board, Reed said, and I am voluntarily surrendering my rights to any family trust distributions derived from Wexler Dominion assets. I am stepping down as a shareholder. Reed, June said, shocked. You are walking away from everything, no? Reed said, I am walking towards something real. I am asking the new ownership. He nodded at me to hire me as a project manager in the renewable division. Entry level. I want to work for my paycheck. I looked at him. It was a brave move. It stripped Barton of his last argument that Reed was just a spoiled brat trying to steal the crown. Reed was giving up the crown to work in the fields. Request granted, I said. Just then, the door opened. A courier walked in and handed a thick red envelope to Reed. Reed looked at it, then walked over and handed it to me. From my mother, he said quietly. She said you might need this for the final nail. I opened the envelope. Inside were copies of credit card statements and flight logs. I scanned them quickly. It was worse than I thought. Barton hadn't just inflated revenue. He had been using the company treasury as his personal piggy bank. There were charges for a private jet to the Maldives listed as site inspection. There was a purchase of a $2 million vintage car listed as marketing machinery. There were invoices for renovations on the Lake Forest estate billed as headquarters maintenance. I held up the papers. If Barton tries to fight the contract voiding, I said to the board, show him this. This isn't just breach of contract. This is embezzlement. If he sues us, we send this to the district attorney. June took the papers. Her face was hard. He bought a villa in Tuscany with the maintenance budget, she asked, her voice trembling with anger. We cut the safety budget last year because he said we were tight on cash. He lied. I said, he stole from the company to feed his ego. The vote was unanimous. The board accepted the Northglass proposal. They voted to terminate Barton's contract with cause. They voted to restructure the company under my control. It was done. In the span of 8 hours, I had gone from an outsider to the owner of the Wexler empire. I signed the final documents as the sun was setting. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, matching the mood of the day. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. "Where is he?" I asked. "He is downstairs." The general counsel said, "He is in the holding room off the lobby. He refuses to leave until he talks to the new owner. He thinks it is the bank." I picked up the file containing the fraud evidence and the embezzlement proof. "Tell him the owner is coming down," I said. Reed stepped forward. "Do you want me to come?" "No." I said, "You have done your part. You broke the chain. This part. This is between me and him." I walked to the elevator alone. My heart was beating steadily. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I felt the cold, precise clarity of a surgeon walking into an operating room. Barton Wexler had spent his life thinking people were commodities. He thought money was the only language that mattered. I was about to teach him a new language. The elevator doors opened into the lobby. The security guards nodded at me. They knew who signed the checks now. I walked toward the glass-walled conference room where Barton was waiting. He was pacing. He looked disheveled. His tie was crooked. He was shouting into his cell phone, likely leaving a voicemail for a senator who was no longer taking his calls. I pushed the door open. Barton spun around. He looked at me, expecting a bank executive or a lawyer. When he saw it was me, he froze. "You?" he sneered. "What are you doing here?" "I am waiting for the person who bought the debt." I closed the door behind me. The latch clicked with a finality that echoed in the empty room. "Sit down, Barton," I said. He laughed. "You don't give orders here. Girl, this is my building." I walked to the head of the table and placed the file down. "Not anymore," I said. I looked him in the eye. "I am North Glass Capital. I am the bank. I am the board. And as of 5 minutes ago, I am the owner of this building and everything in it." Barton's face went slack. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The shell company, the debt, the trap. "No," he whispered. "That is impossible." I sat down. "I told you at dinner that I wasn't looking for a seat at your table," I said softly. I leaned forward. "I bought the table, Barton. And now, I am firing you from it." The confrontation in the lobby of his former headquarters had been the shock. Today was the surgery. I had ordered Barton Wexler to report to the Halcyon Forge offices at 9 o'clock in the morning. I did not send a car for him. I did not offer him a private entrance. He had to walk through the main glass doors, sign in at the security desk like a visitor, and wear a plastic badge that clipped to his lapel. I let him wait. I placed him in Conference Room A, a space we affectionately called the fishbowl. It was a glass-walled cube jutting out from the side of the building, suspended over the street, flooded with unforgiving morning sunlight. There was nowhere to hide in that room. The temperature was perfectly regulated, yet when I watched him from the monitors in my office, Barton was sweating. He sat there for 45 minutes. He checked his watch. He paced. He tried to intimidate the junior associate who brought him water, but the young man just smiled politely and left. Barton was experiencing the singular agony of irrelevance. For decades, he had made people wait hours for him as a power play. He used time as a weapon to remind you that his minutes were worth more than your life. Now, his time was worthless. At 9:45, I walked in. I was alone. I carried a single thin folder. I did not apologize for the delay. I sat at the head of the glass table and gestured for him to sit opposite me. The sun was hitting him directly in the face, forcing him to squint. "You kept me waiting," Barton snapped, his voice hoarse. He looked like a man who hadn't slept since the board voted him out. His suit was expensive, but it hung on him loosely, as if he had shrunk in the wash. I opened the folder. "I was busy saving your company." "Barton," I said calmly, "while you were pacing in here, I was on a conference call with the syndicate of banks, convincing them not to liquidate the assets you spent 40 years accumulating." Barton leaned forward, trying to summon the ghost of his old authority. "This is a hostile takeover," he hissed. "You manipulated the debt. You stole confidential documents. My lawyers are drafting a lawsuit right now. We will tie you up in court for 10 years. You will never see a dime of return on your investment." I looked at him. It was pitiful. He was bringing a knife to a drone strike. "Your lawyers are not drafting anything." "Barton," I said, "because you cannot pay them. The corporate accounts are frozen. The board has suspended your spending authority. Unless you plan to pay them out of your personal checking account, which I suspect is lighter than usual given your recent real estate purchases in Tuscany, you have no legal representation." Barton flinched. The mention of Tuscany hit the mark. "Here is the reality," I continued, keeping my voice level. "You have two options." I held up one finger. Option 1. Northglass Capital executes the debt-for-equity swap immediately. We inject $50 million of liquidity to make payroll this Friday. We restructure the loans. The company survives, the brand survives, and the employees keep their jobs. I held up a second finger. Option 2. You refuse to sign the resignation. The banks declare a hard default at noon today. They seize the collateral. They sell the turbines for scrap. The company ceases to exist by Monday. 5,000 people lose their jobs. And you go down in history not as a titan of industry, but as the man who drove his family legacy off a cliff because his ego couldn't handle losing to a woman. Barton slammed his hand on the table. The glass didn't rattle. It was reinforced. Unlike his composure. "You don't care about the employees," he shouted. "Don't pretend you are a saint. Emma, you are a predator. You are going to gut the workforce to pay back your bonds. You are going to fire thousands of people just to prove a point to me." I pulled a sheet of paper from the folder and slid it across the glass. "Read it," I said. Barton squinted at the document. It was a spreadsheet. "This is the restructuring plan I submitted to the bank." I explained. "Look at line 4. Workforce reduction 0. Barton frowned. Confused. "Then how do you balance the books? You can't service the debt without cutting costs." "Keep reading." I said. "Look at line 10. His eyes scanned down the page. His face turned a pale shade of gray. "Divestment of non-core assets," he read aloud. "Sale of corporate aviation fleet. Sale of Lake Forest guest estate. Cancellation of executive retention packages. Elimination of executive dining and club memberships." He looked up at me, horror dawning in his eyes. "You are cutting the perks." I said, "I found $12 million a year in vanity spending. Barton, private jets, country clubs, the villa, the fleet of luxury cars for the vice presidents. I am not firing the engineers who keep the lights on. I am firing the lifestyle you felt entitled to." "You can't do that," he whispered. "The aviation fleet is essential for executive travel. It is essential for your ego." I corrected. "The new management team will fly commercial. That alone saves $3 million a year. That pays for the health insurance of 400 families." I leaned back. "I am placing the burden exactly where it belongs. Barton, on the people who broke the company, not the people who built it." Barton slumped in his chair. He had tried to play the moral high ground, claiming I would hurt the little people. I had just proved that he was the parasite eating them alive. "Fine," he said, his voice trembling. "You want the company? Take it, but I want my exit package." He straightened his tie, trying to salvage a shred of victory. "My contract states that if I leave, I am owed a severance of $30 million, plus a consulting retainer. You want me to go quietly, you want me to sign your papers, then cut the check, pay me to leave, and I will disappear." I stared at him. It was almost impressive how delusional he was. He truly believed he could set the building on fire and then charge a fee for leaving the scene. I reached into the folder again. I pulled out the final document. It was a copy of his employment agreement, with red ink circling a specific paragraph. "I am not paying you $30 million. Barton, I am not paying you 30 cents, what he sputtered. "It is in the contract. It is ironclad." I pointed to the red circle. "Clause 17, Section B." I recited, "All severance and post-employment benefits are forfeited in the event of termination for cause, specifically including acts of fraud, embezzlement, or gross negligence." Barton froze. "The board didn't just suspend you." "Barton," I said, They voted this morning to terminate you for cause. We have the invoices. We have the flight logs. We have the proof that you used company funds to renovate your private home. That is embezzlement. That voids your golden parachute." I leaned closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream in the silent room. "You are leaving with nothing. No money, no consulting gig, no honorary title. You are walking out of here with the clothes on your back and a reputation that is currently being shredded on CNBC." Barton's mouth opened and closed. He looked like a fish on a dock. The money was his shield. Without it, he was just an old man with a bad temper. He started to shake. Genuine, physical tremors. He looked at the door, then back at me. His eyes filled with water. "Emma, please," he croaked. "You can't do this. I am an old man. This is my life. This is my name on the building. The name stays," I said coldly. "It is a warning to the next generation." He reached across the table, his hand grasping for mine. I pulled back. "I will apologize," he pleaded. "I will call a press conference. I will tell everyone I was wrong about you. I will tell them you are brilliant. I will tell them I welcome you into the family. Just give me something. Give me a role. Let me be a consultant. Just let me come into the office. I don't need the money. I just need to be relevant." I watched him beg. This was the man who had looked down his nose at me at dinner. This was the man who called me trash. Now he was offering to trade his dignity for a desk. I looked at him, studying his face like a biological specimen. "I have a question." "Barton," I said. He nodded eagerly. "Anything. Ask me anything." "Are you apologizing because you realized you were wrong?" I asked. "Or are you apologizing because you lost?" He paused. In that second of hesitation, the truth hung heavy in the air. He didn't regret what he said. He regretted that I had the power to punish him for it. He opened his mouth to lie, but the door behind me opened. Barton looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. Maybe he thought it was a lawyer. Maybe he thought it was a savior. It was Reed. Reed walked in, wearing a simple button-down shirt and slacks. He didn't look like a prince anymore. He looked like a worker. He stood next to my chair, his hands in his pockets, looking down at his father. "Reed." Barton gasped. "Reed, tell her you can't treat your father this way. Tell her we are a family." Reed looked at the man who had controlled every aspect of his life for 37 years. He looked at the sweat on Barton's forehead, the desperation in his eyes. "We aren't a family, Dad," Reed said quietly. "We never were. We were a corporation. And you were the CEO." "Reed." Barton pleaded. "I did it for you. I built this for you. You built it for yourself." Reed said. "You just used me as a brick." Barton turned back to me, playing his final card. "If you destroy me, you lose him," Barton said to me, pointing a shaking finger at Reed. "He will never forgive you for bankrupting his father. Blood is thicker than contracts." "Emma, I didn't speak." I looked at Reed. Reed stepped forward. He placed a hand on the glass table. "I am the one who gave her the flight logs." "Dad," Reed said. Barton stopped breathing. The silence in the room was absolute. "I gave her the proof." Reed continued. "I testified to the board. I am the one who moved to void your contract." Barton stared at his son with a look of total betrayal. You stabbed me in the back." Reed shook his head. "No, I just stopped letting you hold the knife." Reed looked at me. He nodded. He was done. He had said what he needed to say. He turned and walked out of the room, not looking back at the man who was crumbling in the chair. I turned back to Barton. He was broken. The fight was gone. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at the empty chair where his son had stood. I slid the resignation letter toward him. I placed a pen on top of it. "Here are the terms," I said. He didn't look at the paper. He just stared at the table. "You resign effective immediately," I listed. "You waive all claims to severance. You agree to a lifetime ban from the premises of Wexler Dominion and Halcyon Forge. You agree to a permanent non-disparagement clause. If you ever speak my name or Reed's name, or the company's name in public again, I will release the full fraud file to the district attorney, and you will spend your final years in a federal prison cell. Barton looked up. His eyes were dead. And if I sign, he whispered. If you sign, I said, I seal the file. You don't go to jail. You get to retire to Tuscany, assuming you can still afford the property taxes after the IRS audits you. You get to keep your freedom, but you lose the kingdom. He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly the tip tapped against the glass table like a nervous tick. He looked around the bright, sun-drenched room. He looked at the city outside, the city he used to think he owned. I was Barton Wexler, he murmured. Was. I said. He touched the pen to the paper. He hesitated for one last second, perhaps hoping for a meteor to strike the building, for some divine intervention to save him from the consequences of his own arrogance. Nothing happened. The sun just kept shining. He signed. It was a scrawl, a jagged, broken signature that looked nothing like the bold autograph on the annual reports. He pushed the paper away as if it burned him. I stood up. I picked up the document and checked the signature. It was valid. Get out, I said. Barton stood up slowly. He used the table to support himself. He looked old. Suddenly, incredibly old. He walked toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the handle. He didn't turn around. You are cruel, he whispered. I looked at his back. I am practical. Barton, you called me trash. I am just taking out the garbage. He opened the door and stepped out. I watched him walk down the hallway. He didn't have a security detail. He didn't have an entourage. He was just a lonely man in a suit that no longer fit him. Walking toward the elevator that would take him down to the street level, where he would have to hail a taxi like everyone else, I looked down at the paper in my hand. It was just a piece of paper, but it weighed 1,000 pounds. The intercom on the table buzzed. It was Mara. Emma. Did he sign? Yes. I said. He signed. The transfer of control is complete then. Mara said. We own it? I looked out at the city. The skyline glittered in the sun. We own it. I confirmed. What do you want to do now? Mara asked. I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt cleaner, lighter. Call the operations team. I said, tell them to start printing the new badges, and tell the receptionist to remove his portrait from the lobby. I don't want to see his face when I walk in tomorrow. I closed the folder. And Mara, yes. Order lunch for the whole office, not for the executives, for everyone, the engineers, the janitors, the support staff. Tell them it is on the new management. I walked out of the glass room. The sun was bright, but it didn't blind me. It illuminated everything. The war was over. The cleanup was about to begin. The press release hit the wire services at exactly 8 o'clock on Friday morning. It was a standard corporate announcement, dry and legalistic, but it landed like a meteor in the center of the financial district. North Glass Capital acquires controlling interest in Wexler Dominion. Debt restructuring agreement finalized. Executive leadership transition effective immediately. The business world expected a faceless hedge fund manager or a private equity shark to step out from behind the curtain. They expected a liquidator. They expected a butcher. When my name was revealed as the sole managing partner of North Glass Capital, the shockwave was palpable. The headlines shifted from financial analysis to pure, unadulterated gossip. Tech founder Emma Ramirez buys the company that rejected her, the woman who bought her in-laws. It was the kind of story that producers in Hollywood would reject for being too perfect. Yet here it was, scrolling across the tickers in Times Square. I did not give interviews. I did not go on morning talk shows to gloat. I had work to do. I walked into the headquarters of the newly reorganized Dominion Energy at 9 o'clock. The portrait of Barton Wexler that had hung in the lobby for 30 years was gone. In its place was a simple, clean wall of brushed steel with the company's new mission statement, Power for the Future. The atmosphere in the building was not one of fear. It was one of confused relief. For years, these employees had walked on eggshells, terrified that a wrong look or a bad quarter would lead to a public dressing down by the CEO. Today, they looked around, realizing the tyrant was gone, but unsure of the new monarch. I called an all-hands meeting in the main atrium. 5,000 people gathered. They stood on the balconies, filled the floor, and watched via video link from the remote plants. I stood on the small stage where Barton used to hold his rallies. He would stand here and scream about loyalty and blood and sacrifice. I adjusted the microphone. I did not raise my voice. "Good morning," I said. "My name is Emma Ramirez." The silence was absolute. "I know you are worried," I continued. "I know you have read the headlines. You think I bought this company to settle a score. You think this is a personal vendetta and that you are just collateral damage." I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the engineers in their safety vests. I saw the administrative assistants holding their notebooks. I saw the people who actually did the work while Barton was flying his private jet to Tuscany. "You are wrong," I said. "I did not buy this company because of a dinner. I bought it because I looked at the books. I saw a company that generates $3 billion in revenue, but was bleeding cash because of mismanagement at the very top. I saw a company where the people on the floor were working double shifts, while the people in the C-suite were renovating their vacation homes." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. They knew. They had always known. But no one had ever said it out loud. "Barton Wexler is a symbol of a toxic past," I said, my voice hardening. "He believed that fear was a management style. He believed that employees were disposable assets. That ends today." I picked up a stack of papers from the podium. "This is the new operating charter," I announced, "effective immediately. We are implementing a salary freeze for all executive positions and a 10% raise for all operational staff to match inflation. We are selling the corporate jets. We are selling the guest estates. We are liquidating the luxury car fleet. Every dollar we save from cutting the fat at the top goes back into the machinery and the people who run it." I paused. "And one more thing. We are establishing an anonymous, third-party whistleblower hotline. If any manager, director, or executive tries to intimidate you, coerce you, or force you to falsify data, you report it, and they will be fired. The culture of silence is over." For a second, there was no sound. Then, one person started clapping. It was a woman in the front row, wearing a hard hat. Then another. Then the whole room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. It was the sound of 5,000 people exhaling at the same time. That was the twist the media missed. They thought I did this for me. They thought I did this to prove I was good enough for the Wexler name. I didn't give a damn about the Wexler name. I did this because I saw a system that was crushing good people, and I realized I had the power to break the wheel. Barton wasn't just my enemy. He was a cancer to his own legacy. As the crowd dispersed, I saw Reed. He was standing near the back, wearing a standard issue ID badge and a blue button-down shirt. He didn't look like the heir apparent anymore. He looked like Reed. I walked over to him. "How is the first day?" I asked. He smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I had seen on his face in years. "It is terrifying," he admitted. "I actually have to work. I have a project manager named Sarah who told me my spreadsheet formatting was garbage." I laughed. "She is right. Your formatting is garbage." Reed nodded. "I know, but I am learning. For the first time in my life, I am earning my paycheck. Emma, I am not getting it because of my last name. I am getting it because I showed up." He looked at the stage where I had just stood. "You were incredible up there," he said. "He would have hated it. That is the point," I said. Reed hesitated, then pulled an envelope from his pocket. "This is from my mother," he said. "She asked me to give it to you. She filed the papers this morning." I took the envelope. It wasn't a dramatic declaration of war. Celeste Wexler had filed for a legal separation. She wasn't asking for half the fortune. She wasn't asking for a public battle. She was asking for a small apartment in the city, and her maiden name back. She told me she woke up this morning and made her own coffee. Reed said softly, "She said it was the best cup of coffee she had ever tasted, because she didn't have to worry if he would criticize the temperature." I looked at the envelope. Celeste had spent 40 years in a golden cage. I had just unlocked the door, but she was the one who had to step out. "Tell her I said congratulations." I said, "I will." Reed said. He checked his watch. "I have to go. Sarah is going to yell at me if I'm late for the site inspection. He turned and walked away, blending into the crowd of employees. He wasn't a prince anymore. He was just a guy trying to do a good job, and he had never looked taller. The final act of the drama played out 3 days later. In the lobby, I had reclaimed. I was coming back from a lunch meeting with the bank syndicate, who were thrilled with the restructuring plan, when I saw a commotion near the security turnstiles. It was Barton. He was wearing a suit, but it looked slept in. He was arguing with the head of security, a man named Mike, who used to open Barton's car door every morning for 10 years. "Do you know who I am?" Barton was shouting, his voice echoing off the marble. "I built this building. My name is on the deed." I stood by the elevators and watched. I didn't intervene. I wanted to see the system work. "I am sorry." "Mr. Wexler," Mike said, his voice calm and professional. "You are not on the authorized access list." "I need to get my personal effects," Barton yelled. "I left my fountain pen in the office. I have files." "Your personal effects were boxed and couriered to your residence on Friday." "Sir," Mike said, "we have the delivery receipt signed by your housekeeper." Barton grabbed the turnstile, trying to force his way through. "This is illegal. I am the chairman, former chairman." Mike corrected gently but firmly. "Please step back, sir, or I will have to call the police for trespassing." "Trespassing?" Barton gasped. "In my own house." "It is not your house anymore, sir. It is a place of business, and you are disrupting the workflow." Barton looked around. He saw the employees walking past him, people he had ignored for decades. They weren't bowing. They weren't terrified. They were looking at him with a mix of pity and annoyance. He was just an angry old man holding up the line. He saw me then. He froze. He looked across the lobby at me. I was standing next to the new logo, holding a tablet, looking like the future he had tried to reject. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe to scream, maybe to beg, but the words died in his throat. He realized that screaming at me wouldn't work anymore. The currency he traded in fear had been devalued to zero. He let go of the turnstile. He straightened his jacket with a trembling hand. He tried to summon one last shred of dignity, but it was gone. He turned around and walked out the revolving doors. I watched him go. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt the satisfaction of a job well done. I had cleaned a stain out of a carpet. I pulled out my phone. I had one last piece of administrative business to attend to. I opened my email and drafted a message to his personal account. Subject: Closure Barton. You told me at dinner that you have rules about who sits at your table. You said you classify people to keep the standards high. I agree with you. Standards are important. That is why I implemented a new rule for the building today. Entry is based on contribution, not entitlement. You called me trash. Today. I cleaned up. Emma. I hit send. I turned and walked toward the elevator. The ride up to the 45th floor was smooth. When the doors opened, I walked into the boardroom. The table was still there. The view was still there. But the air was different. We had removed the heavy, dark curtains, letting the light flood in. We had replaced the stiff, high-backed leather chairs with modern, ergonomic ones. I walked to the head of the table. I ran my hand along the wood. It was just a table. It wasn't a throne. It wasn't an altar. It was a place where decisions were made. Mara Venn walked in, carrying a stack of files. "The audit committee is ready for the first review," she said, "and the stock is up 15% since the town hall meeting. The market likes the new direction." "Good," I said. "Let them in." I sat down. I didn't sit at the head of the table. I sat in the middle, right next to where the engineers would sit. I looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. It would stay empty. We didn't need a king. We needed a team. Barton Wexler had spent his life building walls to keep people like me out. He didn't realize that walls also keep you in. He had trapped himself in a prison of his own making, isolated by his own cruelty. I had simply knocked the walls down. He thought I belonged under the table, catching the crumbs he deigned to drop. So I bought the whole damn building and showed him the door. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop your location in the comments below. Let's see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to the channel Helena Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who need a little satisfaction in their day.